The refitted habitus exited the rift vein at the edge of the designated system. Rockborn stood in the atrium, watching with the ship's gree as they approached the Sknecht station. The construct displayed on the holoscreen was larger than most livable systems, yet it stretched a mere fraction across the gaping maw of matter in the distance. 2 stars on the far edges illuminated the event horizon of the black hole, spiraling fiery plasma into the void. Rockborn lifted his scaled hand and pointed at the beam of gamma rays being ejected from the pole of the black hole and through the heart of the orbital station. The directions indicated the landing platforms would be near the center there. The gree of habitus focused its eye on the altered human. "I am aware, Rockborn. I have the directions in front of me." Rockborn continued staring at the display. "I meant no disrespect. I am merely sharing my thoughts." The original orbit, newly installed on the habitus, spoke through the comms. "Are you nervous, Francis?" "Slightly, yes," he said as he watched the approach. "I'm worried it is a ruse. The original contact with this species was violent. Sam got hurt. Sam himself has vouched for them since," Orbit continued. "Did he not?" Rockborn nodded slightly. "He did, but he is over-trustful. Optimist is too light a term for that man." The gree looked up at the display. The habitus was near enough hails were being projected along the bottom. "We will soon find out. We are getting transmissions." Rockborn looked over at the tree-like creature's eye. "What are they saying?" Orbit chimed in. "Translating now. Putting them through." The screen started displaying a 3D transcript. "Greetings, envoy of Twain. We are thankful for your arrival. Please follow the guidelights to your docking port." Rockborn cupped his left hand in his right. "So far, so good. Is everyone ready?" Orbit pinged the 2 androids and then responded. "Everyone is ready for approach. Feel free to take us in." The habitus entered through an open gate and disappeared into the innards of the massive station. Kilometers of buildings, refineries, and unknown monolithic structures passed by the ship as it descended in. Rockborn continued watching. Lights flickering along the walls led them deeper in. After several hours of navigating the station's vacuum tunnels, they found a port surrounded by lights. The blinking bits of red and yellow opened up, revealing a landing station. The gree navigated the ship in and proceeded with the landing sequence. The 3 mobile denizens of the ship, each having no need for personal effects, clothes, food, water, or air, were waiting unconcerned at the ramp as it descended down. It hit the metallic floor, ringing with a clang, and they proceeded to walk down toward the singular Sknecht welcoming party. The creature, unarmored as the previously known Sknecht, wobbled forward to them, its red eyes focusing on them each in turn. Rockborn stopped a meter away from it. "Hello, we are the envoy from Twain." The creature looked them over, shifting weight from one large foot to the other, balancing its 4 massive arms over its head. It flittered the gills on the side of its head and then spoke, Orbit translated for Rockborn in his internal comms. "Welcome to the Void Lens. You are the first to visit us in several millennia. Please forgive me, I do not know your customs. Ours are a bit informal, so I will have to improvise for you all." Rockborn looked at Novacor standing to his right, and then at Curator on his left. He then looked at the Sknecht. "Well, we can start with names. I am Francis Rockborn. This," he directed attention to his right, "is one of our top structural engineers, Nova, and this lady to my left is Curator. She is a gifted combatant and planetary organizer." The Sknecht approached closer, examining each in turn. He then looked up at Rockborn. "You are organic-based. These 2 are not. Is that correct?" Rockborn nodded. "That is correct. We also have an AI program running and monitoring us, as well as another organic inside our ship." Curator turned and looked at him slightly. Rockborn nodded back at her. "What is your name?" "I go by Sindonic. This place is my life's work. I am this facilities director, and the one who requested you to come." Nova looked around the empty landing bay. "No others wish to greet us with you?" Sindonic shifted his arms, wobbling around in a circle to face the door. No, all are busy with their tasks. Your introduction to the lens is my task. Follow me. We will start toward the training class. He then began wobbling toward the door. Rockborn shared a glance with his android compatriots, and then the three started the slow trek into the station. After a long walk, the four reached a room and entered. Sindonic motioned for the three to sit, and then continued toward the front of the room. He activated a holo projector and dimmed the lights. A rendering of a small circular station appeared, a beam of light shooting through the center eye of it and out across the room. Sindonic pointed with one of his four-fingered claws. The first ring, designed for the capture of gamma burst radiation from the black hole beneath us. It was the first task needed done here. With it, we were a stable structure and self-capable. He looked over at the three. No, this is not right. Your species base is curiosity-based, isn't it? That's right. You probably want to know whys rather than hows. Let me start over. Curator lifted her hand. Go on however you wish. Each of us is quite capable of following. Sindonic flexed his claws. No. Must adapt the training. He scrolled through the holograms and settled on a picture of an oceanic world. Abyssal, our world of origin. The denizens of this station and the others like it scattered throughout the universe all hail from this world. We have made these structures for the sole purpose of learning the nature of the universe and its creator. The Arlong? Curator asked. Yes, that is who I speak of, Sindonic continued. It was I, with my discovery of the rift and my initial probes that discovered the hidden language projected throughout the cosmos. Older than even my own people, older than we are able to calculate, we have speculated at its reasons and origins. Each addition to the stations have allowed us to read more of the transcript being projected through the ether. Over the eons, we have garnered numerous clues and pieced together the puzzle to near completion. He shifted through the holograms, causing the station to grow rapidly. He then clicked over to a Genforge world and images of totems. We have found worlds containing its growths, as have you. Sindonic looked at the three. We are excited for your arrival here, I must add. He clicked again, showing an image of the original Stygian outpost that became Twain. We helped raise up the Felbians, your Stygians, and funded them to make a security station at the location your civilization is now growing in. He clicked again, and the hologram shifted, showing the station in overlay on the Rift network. Twain rested over a large spiraling bulb in the center. The experiment proved profoundly rewarding. The data we garnered showed that the Arlong was indeed a sentient creature, albeit still unknown origin. It was a truly great discovery. We feasted for several cycles. Didn't the original Stygians go crazy and kill themselves? Novacor asked. Sindonic focused on the Infinigan android. Well, yes. They are a weak-minded species. They did not tolerate the proximity to the transmission source well. After a long exposure, the sequences started causing mental collapse in the subjects. That is irrelevant, though. Curator shook her head. No, that is not irrelevant. We have over 1 million inhabitants there now. How long of an exposure was needed before the madness started? It is of no concern now. Sindonic flicked to another image. The waves have changed. The image showed lines of frequency being emitted from the central rift bulb. Over time, the Arlong has shifted its focus. We think it is learning from us. This is all ahead of the class, though. You are to know safety procedures here, and then we will do a full sharing. Sindonic flicked through to map of the station. Note all the blue dots. These are evacuation points should anything happen. Make sure your eject trajectory does not get skewed. If you miss a line, you will breach the event horizon and be lost. He clicked again. The prerequisites for your envoy included gravitational resistance, gamma resistance, and mental durability. This station operates in the black hole's field of operation. You are being exposed presently to high-energy particles. The fact you are still functioning shows the Clouder has sent proper emissaries. He clicked over to an image of galaxies, each spiraling at different rates. This station is specifically designed to operate in a field that slows its rate of change and decay relative to most of the universe. Each of you, hopefully, were selected due to your understanding of that. Curator nodded. We have, and we understand the consequences. Good. He continued. In the event of any emergency on board, you are not required to assist. We have protocols and designated attendants to every task. If you assist, you will merely be in our way and cause delay. Is that understood? Rockborn nodded. You have many emergencies? Sindonic focused his eyes in and out at him. Given enough time, every system will fall into decay if not consistently kept in check, and we have been here a very long time. Curator looked over at Nova. Nova shook his head, bobbing his ears. Rockborn continued. That didn't answer my question. What is the current state of this station? Have your people been keeping up with it? Sindonic closed his claws, putting 2 of the 4 on the table. This is the highest grade research facility in the known universe. Everything is operational, and we take great pride in that. You will do well to not disrespect us on that front. Rockborn typed on the communicator in his chest. I meant no disrespect. We do not know your people, nor do we know how you conduct yourselves. Every species is different, and I've encountered some that you have to worry about, or you will find yourself in emergency situations. Rockborn looked over at Nova. Sindonic opened his claws and continued with the presentation. That is not the case here. If anything did happen, it would be due to an external, unprecedented source. He clicked to the next image, highlighting numerous sites on the system-sized station in orange. For instance, we have been attacked 3,297 times by numerous different species. These battery placements here are capable of dispensing a complete arc of destruction to anyone on approach should they be hostile. Rockborn pointed. Only on the outward side? Sindonic focused on him. What need would we have to defend the event horizon? He looked over at Curator. I thought your group was meant to be mentally fit and durable. Rockborn didn't acknowledge the slight. What kind of armaments do you have? Sindonic paused. All of them. Nova tilted his head. All of them? Yes. You name the type, and we have them in the batteries. We are very thorough. Curator nodded. Interesting enough. When can we start the tour? Sindonic shut his eyes for a moment and then opened them, focusing on the female android. When the introductory course is over, do not be impatient. Curator slowly blinked her eyes. Understood, please. Carry on. After another hour, all 3 of the emissaries were showing attention outwardly, but were sending missives back and forth. Rockborn was typing diligently on the slate in his chest, commenting on Sindonic's droning. Curator and Orbit were discussing the station's firewalls, while Nova and the Gree were chatting about their hopes the Clouder will progress well while they are away. Abruptly, Sindonic turned on the 3 after highlighting trade corridors through the station and the hazards of shuttle transit. And that is the last image. There, safety discussion done. Are you 3 ready for the tour? All 3 nodded in sync. Rockborn started standing. Sindonic turned off the holometer and started wobbling toward the door. Rockborn walked close behind him. We're going to be taking one of the transits? Of course. Of course. I will show you your quarters and then we will transverse the station. It will be an enjoyable journey. Do any of you require sustenance? Rockborn shook his head. No. Their quark batteries are good for quite a while before needing a charge, and my isotopes will last for several years still. Sindonic slowly progressed down the hall, turning and looking up at the altered human. Impressive. I would like to study you while you stay here, if that is possible. Your body is right in line with several of my own lines of study. You do not age by chance, do you? Rockborn shook his head, typing over the open comms. No. I reconfigured my body for space. Exactly in line with my studies. The Sknecht continued. Also, You will all find it difficult to conduct your normal espionage. Our programs are quite formidable. The best coding from 1,000 species were tested, compiled, and put into place for our security. I do encourage you to continue probing, though. Any weaknesses you find will help us in the future." Curator looked at Nova, and then back at Sindonic. "I apologize. We didn't mean to be rude. It is not rude at all. It is quite common among visitors to try. Again, it helps us grow." Sindonic looked down a crossing corridor and clacked claws at another wobbler who paused to let them pass. "Do not worry. We are thankful for your envoy. The exchange of information is much needed." Curator noted the shelled wobbler as they passed by. She lifted her hand. Yes. About that. When are we going to be allowed to share that data? We're curious about what all you have accumulated." Rockborn nodded at that. "Yes. We were sent here specifically under the impression you were willing to share your hour-long data." Sindonic waved his claw at them. "After the tour, we will conduct the exchange after the tour." The trio shared a glance at each other. After a long, slow walk, the four reached a slip tube with a pod waiting. They entered, and Sindonic activated the transit. The pod started moving without disturbing them. It accelerated quickly through the tube, the lights and sights outside becoming a blur. After a moment, the pod took a turn and entered into a tube running over the upper outside of the station hull. The three stared out over the span of buildings and structures, the canopy of stars stretching high above them. Sindonic eased his eyes open, taking in the scene. "This is my favorite. When I need to relax, I will take a joyride around the station for a couple cycles like this." He focused his eyes back down and looked at Rockborn. "To walk the station would take most of our lives. This is the only way to get any kind of understanding of it." Novacor began calculating. "The amount of materials to build this. How did you acquire it? There has to be thousands of systems worth of matter in this." He turned and looked at Sindonic. "And you said there are other stations like this?" The Sknecht clacked a claw. "This is the largest, but yes, there are many." He turned back toward the stars and unfocused his eyes. "It was necessary to build these arrays. Even as large as they are, we are only able to absorb a fraction of the signal being emitted." Curator took a step toward the wobbler. "Where did you acquire the materials?" Sindonic continued, staring out the window. "Everywhere we can. The Great Hole didn't used to be a great hole." Curator looked at Rockborn. Rockborn approached Sindonic. "Wait, there used to be systems within the rim?" Sindonic, still staring out, continued. "Their removal aided us with not just material, but in helping filter out noise projected out from the main spiral. It was a double boon for us." "Were there native species in those systems?" Curator asked. "Oh, of course. The rift brought in numerous life forms, both sentient and natural transients." "And what happened to them?" she continued. "Thankfully, most were processed into their elemental constituents, but some of the more tenacious species hid in the workcrafts, spreading out as we did." Sindonic looked back at the three, focusing his eyes. "They did not prove a bother to us, so we allowed the hitchhiker's stowage. Some we even enjoy." Curator typed over the private comm. "This could explain the preservers." "Scribblers, too," Nova replied. Sindonic looked out through an expanse of towers illuminated by the central gamma burst. "Yes, both of those species are survivors of our mining operations." Curator's eyes widened. "You have access to our channel?" "Of course. The station is designed to absorb and translate the weakest signal floating through the universe. Your chatter is obvious and easily understood," he said. Nova tilted his head. "Our apologies then for talking over your presentation." Sindonic turned back and stared at the Infinigan android. "No need for apologies. Every species is different and conducts themselves in odd and often amazing ways. Whatever your natures are, it is not my place to judge them." Curator shared a look with Rockborn, then turned back toward the Sknecht. "Yet you still judge?" Sindonic clacked one of his claws shut. "Of course, And so do you. He turned back out to look at the light scatters being shot out from the black hole far below the station. Now let us continue the tour. After a dozen hours of speeding around the starbase in the subliminal tube pod, Sindonic charted a course and took the trio towards the main data center. I have a friend you all are going to meet. Given you do not know our methodology, I must inform you any hostility will be taken as an offense. Please do not use any of your internal weapons or raise your tones in anger around him. Is that understood? Novacor bobbed his robotic ears. Of course. We are here on a diplomatic mission. It's the last thing on our agenda. Rockborn almost texted out a witty remark, but held his internal fingers as he knew the Sknekt on the station were reading their transmissions. Curator, looking out the window and tracing the power lines, spoke up. Where is all this energy being funneled to? Sindonic actuated the terminals up ahead. That is actually where we are heading. It is our primary data center. You are here for the sharing of knowledge. That is where we will commence with the data transfers. Curator turned and looked at him. Nova and I are digital creatures, as is Orbit. We can do the transfer anywhere. Sindonic clapped two of his claws. I have been programming since your creators were biological soup. I encourage you to hold your instructions and follow mine. Nova gave her a glance and widened his eyes. Curator nodded. To the data center, then. Sindonic relaxed his claws. Good. We will be there shortly. The pod started decelerating and easing into a side tube for disembarking. The pod door hissed open, and Sindonic looked around at the trio, focusing his eyes on each. Well, let us head in to meet my friend. It was a long, tedious walk down another red-lit hallway as they followed Sindonic's wobbling stature. Curator took note of the power lines emanating heat from the other side of the wall panels. She raised a hand and ran it along the wall. Sindonic pivoted one of his eyes at her. Please do not touch the walls. This is a finely tuned part of the facility. Only the floors are designed for vibrational contact. Curator scanned the walls and withdrew her hand. My apologies. Sindonic turned his focus back toward the front and led them up to the door at the end of the hallway. It spiraled open and they walked inside. The trio looked around, calibrating their light detection arrays and eyelets to accommodate the brightness of the interior. Lines running through the large space glowed with heat and light-emitting materials. At the center was a large metal cylinder covered in an array of lights and gelatinous-filled tubes and funnels. Sindonic shrank his eye ports down and approached the center column. The metal front covering unfurled, revealing a vat in the center. Sindonic raised his 4 claws toward the vat. This is my longtime friend and co-founder of the Void Lens mode. The three stared at the red-shelled Sknekt in the vat. Hundreds of lines ran through the fluid from the main trunks and funnels and into its body. Sindonic looked over at Curator. You have the requested scans of the human in question and the AI from the derelict, correct? Curator nodded. Yes. You are going to share your findings with us as well? Sindonic raised and lowered his body, attempting to mirror a humanic nod. Of course. If you would be kind and upload the orbit, Mode will begin the analysis. Novacor raised his 2 right arms. Orbit is a sentient and legal resident of the Clouder. We need to confirm no harm is going to be done. He looked around at the other 2. We need to know what you mean by analysis. From inside the tank, a voice rang out over the comms. Mode boomed throughout the room in a groan. I will not harm your program. You brought it here specifically to find out the nature of the viral incurrence wound throughout its core. That is all I intend to do. If it makes you calm, I will allow the orbit to be conscious during the procedure. Orbit spoke up through the comms. I will be all right, Nova. The Sknekt are right. I came along for this. Curator shut her eyes for a moment, focusing on Orbit in the digital space. Brother, these creatures are aggressively confident. You are putting yourself at risk. They may unintentionally hurt you. Orbit looked into her, code into code. Sister, I was alone for a long time. I gave up on escaping or being found. If anything happens to me here, it is overdue. Maybe my time spent in that between space can be of benefit. Orbit flickered images and memes of comfort and release. Let me do this. Curator opened her eyes and looked at Rockborn. All right, I'm okay with this. Mode boomed again. Then Orbit, please proceed and upload. Orbit commenced and transferred his code from the habitus through the station conduits and into the primary bio-orchestrated server. Hello? Did you make it through okay? A voice asked. Orbit stretched out, feeling the speed and space of his surroundings. He looked out into a bubble of code keeping him confined. Yes, I'm here. Mode? Yes, it's me. I'd like to run a diagnostic on you if you don't mind. Orbit nodded to his digital self. Yeah, that's probably wise. Commencing, Mode said. Orbit felt an infinity of pinpricks poking into his code. Memories, videos, sound, diagrams, computations, all flittered quickly in and out of focus. How are you feeling? Mode asked. That was odd. Felt like I was going to implode a couple of times. No, I had you. You're isolated and spread out. I wouldn't have let you lose phase. Orbit felt the diagnostic cycle end, and then he appeared in a plane, standing in his familiar purple self. He looked over his body and his clothing adjusted to his school uniform. Did you find anything? He asked. A glowing red sknecht armored in a large shell appeared beside him, the rendering of Mode. Oh yes, I found a scattering of disturbances all throughout your code. But before I dive into it, I will make good on our part and share what we know. It will be pertinent for understanding what I'm pulling from your partitions. Orbit nodded slightly. All right, fill me in then. The empty expanse around Orbit shifted as holograms filled in. Within a span of less than a second, Orbit was floating in the space between universes that was the rift. Oh shit. Not here again. I'm sorry if it elicited bad memories, but the signature that is the Arlang is written here. Mode appeared beside Orbit's purple body. He spread his 4 claws out, zooming in on the massive turbulent sphere in the center of the main rift storm. This is the heart of the rift, the source of its occurrence. Mode turned and moved a claw, and the two sped through the central storm and into one of the rivulets, zipping impossibly fast upstream. This would be impossible outside of the digital framework. We were able to map this using standard rift jumps outside of the rift web. Orbit looked over at Mode. You mapped the rivulets using your own ships outside of them? Mode focused his eyes on the purple hologram. Of course. It is still the best course of study that we have found, direct and observational. No. You're right. But that must have taken what? 1,000 years? More? Mode stretched his claws. Yes. The smaller ones stayed on mission for around that amount. The larger rivulets we had ships gone upwards of 200,000 of your primary world's revolutions. It took time, but it is all part of the mystery. Quite amazing, don't you think? Orbit nodded. Mode kept pushing them upstream, and then had them exit. Orbit instantly recognized the Milky Way. This is the Earth stream, then. Mode focused again on him. Yes. Your worlds are generally far from the rivulets, and thus the primary signal never reached them. After a few systems away from it, it devolves into background noise. Mode flared his claws, and the galactic map shrank down, and then he highlighted with an overlay the rift network. It resembled an algorithmic neural web. Mode watched as Orbit took it in. Orbit looked at him. The amount of energy to keep such a thing operating is near unimaginable. What's it using? We don't know. Nothing on this side. We think it's a bulge from another dimension. Mode turned back to the display and shrank back in with his claws, focusing now on the twain. The system itself is one clue. The others are intrinsic in the code seepage it is emanating. Mode shifted the color of the holographic display so as to highlight the frequency ripples across the universe. Orbit watched as the data stream spiraled outward, following the rift sheath out and into the galaxies near the rivulets. Orbit pointed. That's definitely designed. Have you deciphered it? Mode focused his 2 red eyes on Orbit and brought his claws together. That is heavily sped up. That bit of code you're watching is moving specifically on the time frame we have adjusted this station to exist upon. Orbit looked back at the ripples. Oh, have you deciphered it? Mode slowly closed his claws, tightening them. It took us a very long time to realize our inability to understand it was due to being out of time phase with it. Orbit gave a human sigh. All right, how did you figure it out? Mode relaxed his claws. It was the totem. We had been studying the occurrence beyond the death of our homeworld. The remnants of our species existed solely in the study ships. It was our second scan of the anomaly when one of our researchers decided to do a spur examination of its effects on species in its proximity. That is when we found the gene forges. Orbit nodded. I went over those files with my double. Robotic systems that spontaneously generated through long-term exposure to this signal. Mode wavered in midair. Yes and no. It was not spontaneous. It was calculated and done over millennia. That is when we adapted the station and ourselves to the current time rate. Orbit looked back at the ripples going through space. So, once you adapted the timer rate, you were able to pick up the full signal. Yes, Mode continued. Before we were just picking up traces, confusion, random bits of cohesion in a sea of noise. Orbit looked down at himself. I didn't think of that. We were so worried it was a viral load, maybe with some encryption of some sort. Mode flexed and changed the hologram to display the callistode. The only encryption is time. Once you solve for that, it becomes apparent as light. Orbit recognized his memories of the ship. It was the moment directly after entering the rift. A flash of darkness strode through the code controlling the shield emitters. Energy arced through the ship. A moment later, a dash of code ripped through the life control systems, causing atmospheric failures. Another blip, and several other systems failed, causing a cascade of electrical blowouts. Orbit felt the digital equivalent of tears welling up. I don't want to watch this. I lived it. Mode focused back on Orbit. I'm sorry, but you need to see this. Mode turned back to the display and adjusted it to the void lens timer rate. Watch now. Orbit watched. The cataclysm that killed the crew lasted a split second. The entirety of the years spent in Rift lasted but a minute. Mode rewound it and played it again. Orbit watched the dark patches and they slowly became a consistent flow of data probes. It's a scan. Exactly, Mode said. You're the first AI to survive it. I'm honestly impressed with you. Orbit looked at the red glowing sknecht. I had to jump from node to node, constantly repairing what I could with the few droids that survived. In the end, I barricaded myself in a stasis field. You did well. Mode turned and shifted the view into the shuttle bay. Now for the interesting part. Orbit watched as Mode rewound the recording and played it again, this time with them standing in the bay. Mode looked at Orbit. Notice anything? No scans here. Orbit quickly answered. Exactly. Mode pointed at the deserted spot left from Bethany leaving. Watch there, and I'm going to overlay the scans of the ship. Orbit watched as a complete scan of the shields was completed, and rendering appeared in the shuttle bay detailing a shielding system. Then a scan ran through the hull, and a ship design appeared over the shielding mechanics. Another scan of the life support, and the rendering incorporated human atmospheric principles. A propulsion scan, electrical systems, gravity control, even the mess hall, one after the other became incorporated into the sleek black horizontal pyramid. Orbit looked over at Mode. All the destruction. It's all an accident. It didn't try to kill everyone. Orbit knelt down and put his hands on his head. It's trying to share a ship design with us. Mode knelt down beside Orbit. It appears so. I have analysts going over this with me, and we came to the same conclusion. We think it wants visitors. Orbit looked up at the ship. You going to build it? Mode slowly closed his claws. This is a human ship. Orbit stood back up, looking at him. You going to adapt it? Probably not. Well, at least not yet. Consensus that is happening is that we think we will wait until after your investigation. Orbit stared at it. What? You want us to go? Mode relaxed his claws. You have that scan of your human? I'd like to run the same scenario through it. Orbit sighed. You think Sam had something similar done to him? Mode waved the Callisto display away, leaving the two standing back in the holographic void. Mode then stared at Orbit. You and your designer race are particularly capable of surviving. We've left numerous species unshielded and exposed to the raw signal. It is quite interesting that not only did he survive such exposure, but you did as well. We're just another experiment to you, aren't we? This whole diplomatic mission envoy stuff is bullshit, isn't it? Orbit asked. Mode stared, focusing his red eyes on him. It is the only thing that has kept us alive. You see that, don't you? Orbit laughed. This stupid Arlang nonsense. This signal from beyond is your driving purpose? This is stupid. And yet you are intrigued. Orbit stood still for a moment and then nodded. Yeah, it poses a lot of questions. Mode touched his claws together, still staring. Exactly. It is those questions that have driven us, and yes, you are an experiment to us. Everything is an experiment to us. You see this? Orbit nodded. If we do this, you'll leave them alone? Mode relaxed and dilated his eyes. If you help us with this, we will give you researcher status. You will have respect among my people. With that, you can help us guide our experiments. Orbit shifted on his feet. Guide experiments away from the Clouder. Mode shifted on his 2 feet as well. Everything we do is a debate. If one researcher has a valid point as to why a certain system or species may be of future value, we will respect that. Orbit nodded. Understood. All right, let's look over that bioscan.